You're running around frantically, desperately checking all your windows and doors. Tonight's no different than any other night, though. You always follow the same nightly routine. You've spent all day listening to creepypastas, and now you've made yourself paranoid of the night. You don't want to admit it to yourself, but you're scared to turn off the light. You try to convince yourself that it's all in your head, but you can't. After watching some TV and listening to funny videos on YouTube, you finally get the courage up to go to bed. Just as you're about to fall asleep, your ears alert you that your back door has just creaked open. You rush out of the room frantically with baseball bat in hand to investigate the noise. You breathe a sigh of relief as you remember that you simply forgot to lock the door and that it just must have blown open from the wind. You go through one last run-through in your mind. You think that you might be talking aloud to yourself when you hear from behind you. You locked all the windows and doors, right? Good. Now we're both locked in for the night. It was an overcast and dull Saturday afternoon when I was attacked. I was 12 years old at the time, and despite the threat of rain, we took to the streets as my friends usually did on the weekends. The neighborhood always seemed safe, and, looking back, it was a wonderful place to grow up. Living in the vibrant shadow of the city center, only a 15-minute train journey away, while the parks and quiet streets of our suburb, on the outskirts of that urban madness, provided plenty of places to explore. That day, it was my two friends Andy and Stuart who knocked on my door, asking if I wanted to head out for a while on our bikes. Both lived on the same street as me, and for that reason we had been as thick as thieves since we were toddlers. We took to the pavements at first in plain sight of our parents, before turning a corner and showing off to one another, on the roads, pulling wheelies and unimpressive bunny hops as most kids that age often do. I say most kids. I was pretty timid at the time, and while I loved hanging out with my friends, I never had the same sense of abandonment or recklessness which they thrived on. They would quite happily bomb down the highest, steepest hills without a care in the world, while I would stutter behind, scuffing my feet on the ground to slow my own descent. After buying some sweets, chocolate, and a packet of trading cards complete with cheap and brittle bubblegum from Jackie's shop, we intended to head to King's Drift, one of our favorite places to ride and skid around on our bikes. But just as we exited the shop, Stuart noticed someone from his class. His name was Ricky, and he had moved to our school the year previous. We didn't know him very well, but we had hung out with him once or twice before. Stuart walked over and struck up a conversation with him for a few minutes before coming back and picking up his bike. We turned to leave, but there was something that bothered me about that boy Ricky. He seemed lost somehow. Stuart said that he was waiting on his mom coming out of the shop, but I could see that look in his eyes. Something which I'm sure I had worn myself many times before. It simply said, "I want to hang out with you guys." We all got on our bikes, and just as we left, I shouted over to him, "Hey Ricky, you know King's Drift?" "Yeah," he replied. "We'll be up there for the next 2 hours. Why don't you get your bike and come meet us after you've helped your mom?" He seemed pleased to be asked, and while he told us that he didn't know how long he would be, he did say that he'd try and catch up with us at some point. We said goodbye, carrying our provisions from the shop in stuffed pockets, and cycled off towards our destination. King's Drift was where we were heading, and I couldn't wait to get there. It was perfect. The street was long and straight, the road surface was uncommonly smooth, and it ended in a small circular cul-de-sac which resulted in little traffic, if any to speak of. We could ride up and down all day without being disturbed, except on the few occasions when someone who lived there would come out yelling, tired of us hanging around or sneaking into their garden playing tag and one-man hunt. But for the most part, that long, secluded street was a fantastic place to get away from rules and complaining adults, yet only 10 minutes away from our houses. We weren't a gang or anything close to it, but that place was ours, and while many of the other kids in the neighborhood hung around a park or at the shops, We quite happily hung on to that perfect stretch of quiet tarmac, which no one could take away from us. Tearing up and down the road, cycling as fast as we could. Andy enjoyed showing off, pedaling quickly while putting both hands behind his head as if relaxing on a sun lounger. Stuart was no slouch himself, and would dart about off and on the curbs, occasionally mimicking a character from an Australian soap opera that we often laughed at. That day, the clouds knitted together tightly above, brooding menacingly, but the afternoon was not over yet, as we continued to play and enjoy our patch. After receiving an earful from one woman who just hated us sitting on her garden wall, especially when my other friend Stuart pushed Andy over it into her garden as a joke during her red-faced ranting rage, we finally trapezed along the street with our bikes by our sides, cursing the woman under our collective breath. A loud crash bellowed from the clouds above, and the hazed smell of ozone climbed up through the air. When I was a kid, thunderstorms always held a real fascination for me, and to this day they still do. But no matter how much I understand why it happens, when the sky opens up and a torrid torrential downpour threatens to drown all around, it still seems surreal to me, and almost unearthly. The rain streamed down in thick sheets, and within a minute a thin layer of water began to flow along the street into the drains on either side. The complaining woman ran indoors quickly, her anger at us soon replaced by a desire to avoid being drenched. The noise of millions of raindrops smashing on the parked cars and concrete below became deafening, as we were instantly soaked to the bone. It was clear that the day was over, and while Andy seemed keen to stay and pull a variety of skidding stunts in the water, Stuart just laughed, challenging us both to a race home. Off he sped at a rate I could never hope to equal, the water spraying out from under his wheels. Andy followed instantly, damn sure that he wouldn't be beaten. The crescendo of thumping water was now deafening, and as both my friends pulled away into the distance, I clumsily climbed aboard my bike and pedaled as fast as I could. With each panting breath, the rain fell harder until it streamed at such a rate down my face that I could barely see ahead. The noise, the lashing of rain against pavement and road drowned out my voice as I yelled to my friends to wait. They never heard me, and I shivered in the increasing cold, continuing on even though I could no longer tell if my friends were near or far. I no longer cared. I just wanted to get home. I cannot explain the feeling I had at that moment. Perhaps it is hindsight which is bounded to my memory. But there, in that horrid downpour, I felt isolated. Anyone with a slither of sense would have ran for cover and locked themselves away happily inside their house, and at the speed my friends had darted away at, I was sure by now that they must have left the street or reached its end at least. An intense feeling of fear drove me on, because for me, King's Drift may have appeared remote, isolated in the blinding rain. But it did not feel empty. In my panic, my wild pedaling shook the bike from side to side, and just as I lifted one hand from the handlebars to wipe the rain from my eyes, something walked out from between two parked cars right in front of me. I swerved, squeezed the brakes as hard as I could, and as the bike screeched to a halt, I was thrown forward, tumbling to the ground, smashing my face and jaw on the road surface. The rain poured into my mouth, carrying with it the metallic taste of my own blood. I let out a cry as I reached up with my tongue to feel nothing but exposed gum and broken shards of teeth that were surely sprayed across the ground. My injuries left me confused and disoriented, but as I screamed for my friends, for help, it became clear that no one could hear me over the immense roar of the rain. Then, the sky darkened, and that strange, alarming sensation that I was not alone finally proved correct. Someone was standing over me. A combination of tears, blood, and rain stung my eyes, and while I couldn't make out his face, I could tell it was a man. He was broad and stocky, wearing denims and a dark brown coat, and while he wasn't exceptionally tall, his frame stood firm in the face of the elements, giving the impression of immense strength. Despite the pain, despite the shock at losing teeth and cracking my head open, every fiber of my being told me to run, to get away. But I couldn't. With the first movement of my leg, the man pressed his foot down on top of my knee with such force that bursts of excruciating pain shot up through my body, my screams of both agony and terror drowned out by the bitter storm. Why was he doing this to me? A grown man! He leaned over and grabbed my bleeding head by the hair, yanking forcefully upwards. No one can know the feeling of an adult exerting their full force on you, unless you've been victim to it. The fear, the utter helplessness, the feeling of resentment and betrayal at a person who should protect, but instead harms and hurts. No matter how much I struggled, no matter how much I flailed, my puny 12-year-old body could provide no amount of strength to free me from his foul, overpowering grip. But a bike thrown square at his face by two dear friends was more than enough to make sure that he stumbled backwards, causing him to slip in the rain and batter his back and body against the solid street surface. As the man staggered to his feet once more, Andy and Stuart grabbed me by the arms and forced me to run for my life. We dared not look back, for fear of our pursuer being close. We panted and heaved, and as the adrenaline surged through my veins, I forgot my injuries for a moment and fled as quickly as any child ever has. As we reached the end of King's Drift, Andy and Stuart ran around the corner without looking back. But not me. For curiosity has always been my sin. And perhaps my punishment. The rain calmed at that moment, easing off to nothing but the most subtle of droplets, and as I squinted through blood and tears, I saw, at the end of the road, the brutal figure of the man who had attacked me, disappearing forever out of sight, with the bloodied, motionless body of poor Ricky hanging over his shoulder. I'm always playing the part. Ever since this stupid movie started, the part has never really left me. You're probably confused. Oh well. All the people I would confide in aren't exactly around. If you have a few minutes, I can tell you a story that'll drive you crazy. And trust me, I mean that. It all started because I was desperate. See, I'm an actor, or at least, I used to be. I haven't had a role in over 2 years. I had a part in one of those big movies. It was filmed for nothing and grossed way too much to be healthy for the average person to have at one time. I'd been riding on that, but my addictions to fast cars, hot women, and cocaine weren't exactly feeding the piggy bank. It started to dry up faster than it took me to ruin an intern's life on the set. And so, desperation set in. It started with the average frantic thoughts. What if my wife leaves me? What if my car gets repoed? What if they take away my house? What if I run out of cocaine? Yeah, those may or may not have been in order of importance. So I scrambled, reaching towards the bottom of the barrel for a part to feed the pig. You would think that I'd find some romantic comedy or a buddy cop movie to satisfy me, but no! I found a slasher flick. Yay me! Fake blood that makes you itch, and makeup applied by kids that were practicing on mannequin heads 2 months ago. But something was different about this one. Something just didn't sit right. I guess it's hard to explain. But I brushed that away. I signed for the role of the slasher himself, a beastly fellow that was basically the offspring of one of Mr. Myers and Mrs. Voorhees. His story was stupid and convoluted, like every other slasher flick ever. Something about an abusive father, an absent mother, some alcoholic bullies, that sort of thing. He was the victim of a previous slasher, which left him permanently scarred both mentally and physically. The mental scarring is simple enough to understand. I mean, he witnessed almost his entire town die. That would drive anyone crazy. The physical scarring was a ripped-out left eye, 2 gashes on the right cheek that formed an X, and a missing nose. Yes, it's a ghastly picture. Yes, my beautiful face had to be altered with makeup and CG to make it, and yes, I was horrified. Yes, I was that desperate. No, apparently I'm not above that kind of work. It would take almost 2 hours in the dressing room to pull off this look, mind you. Half the time I was sleeping, and most of the time you only saw the slasher's face for a millisecond. Oh, it was a grueling process. After about 3 weeks of filming, we finally filmed the first murder scene. Up to this point, it was all day scenes that set the backstory, and the director didn't think of shooting the night scenes when things started to get dark. It was a simple enough scene to pull off. The sorority girl, back visiting from college, would see me on the side of the road looking like a homeless man, would pull over to ask if I was okay, and then I would follow her home and murder her family off-screen, whilst setting a trap for her to stumble upon the bodies. If that sounds overly familiar, don't worry. I know. The trap was a bit grisly, mind you. She had to walk into her parents' room and see the dog lying on the bed in a pool of blood. She would run out of the room, but her father was now hanging upside down at the entrance of it. She would then scream and back away towards the window, where I was watching as the body of her mother fell from the closet. I would jump through the window at that time and chase her throughout the house until I cornered her in the bathroom and did the deed. Yes, I did get shivers. Luckily, the shooting process allowed the scene to be broken up in a variety of camera angles, so you never truly got the entire scene altogether until it was edited. So no goosebumps. The thing that shook me was watching the trap play out. You feel a sense of entitlement knowing that you're playing the guy that put that together. Truth be told, I wanted more. Screening continued, more murder scenes were shot, and the movie was finished, but my yearning grew more and more throughout the course. I started small, mind you. Rabbits, stray cats, and a dog here and there. I never dreamed of actually hurting anybody. Well, yes, I dreamed of hurting people. But those are just dreams, right? I'm not crazy, no. Not yet. About 3 rabbits, 2 dogs, and 15 cats. Yes, my town had a cat issue later. I found myself at peace. What a marvelous thing I had done. I vented my anger, got my gratification, and helped my town with the cat problem. Things were going swimmingly, and the revenue from the movie turned out to be smashing. It grossed something like $2 million. I had a free ride for at least a year with me playing the lead role. And then they contacted me for a sequel. Oh yes, a sequel. A slasher flick 2 to go along with slasher flick 1. It was brilliant. I jumped at the chance to play the role again, and I felt at home in the makeup and prop clothes that the character wore. I would creep up on stage directors and crew and scare them a bit for a little fun in between scenes, and I again watched the traps roll out and the bodies of the actors that played the part flop down. But something was amiss with the 5th murder scene. I was supposed to chase a young man through a gym until he fell down the stairs to the locker room. Now, usually in cinema, scenes like this would be shot with either padding or dummies, but the director wanted none of that. The plan was to make him fall slowly down the stairs and then speed it up in the editing room. But it didn't work that way. As I gave chase, he truly did fall down the stairs and snapped his neck on the railing. He died instantly, the doctors say, and the sequel was cancelled due to the fees needed to pay off his family for the incident. But watching that body fall, going plop, 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 bang, down the stairs, it introduced a whole new concept to me, and gave me the urge once again. I had a feeling that cats and dogs wouldn't do it for me anymore either. The first headline read, "Killer recreates scene from grisly movie." It made me laugh. It was only one column behind a bunch of ads for cars that you could never afford and appliances that you would only get one use out of. But it was still there. What I did was recreated the first murder from the slasher flick I starred in, right down to the letter. Oh, it was brilliant. And the shrieks were real. There was no pause for an angle change. There were no floodlights. There was no fat man sitting in the director's chair. There was just me, 4 dead bodies, and what was supposed to be a prop machete. You'd be surprised how easy it is. The moment where a living being becomes an inanimate object, oh, it's overpowering. It's addicting, and it's fun. And I never stopped either. I would recreate the scenes from the movies, then I would make my own. I would play this role until the day I died, with my machete and my makeup. I would stalk and shank and cause shivers wherever I roamed. Every state across the United States I've been to and I've killed in. But you probably knew all this. I mean, you were the only one that followed me. The only one that almost stopped me. The only kill that ever got away. But now you're tied up. Now you're tied, bloody, beaten, and stabbed. And, unless my watch is wrong, you've probably been dead for over 20 minutes now. What is it about the night that gets people so scared? Think about it. The majority of people get freaked out by small little things around the house at night, but not during the day. And, without a car or people to go with them, hardly anybody will go out at night by themselves. Sure, there are people that are brave and they go out and they do it, but it doesn't mean that they aren't scared. Maybe it stems from some distant superstition hiding in the back of your mind. Maybe it's not a distant thing at all. Maybe you just scare easily. But if that's the case, what then scares you? If you were walking down a quiet road in the middle of the day, you could do it without missing a beat. So why not at night? Why is it that when night falls, you hesitate? Maybe it's that gut-wrenching silence that allows you to be fully aware of every little sound around you. Maybe it's the lack of people. Being alone is something that more than a few people are afraid of. Fear. Maybe it's that. The fear of nighttime? No. The fear of nighttime simply stems from it. The age-old fear of the darkness. Ah, that's it. You're afraid to be in the dark. But only when you're alone. Why is that? Could it be that being alone allows for certain things to happen that could be less likely with company? Or is it that being alone makes that silence all too piercing? That silence makes your hair stand on end. Maybe though, just maybe, it's because when you are all alone in the dark, that silence makes you aware of when you're not alone. Confused? That's okay. Allow me to explain. You might be the only one there that you know of, but when that deafening silence is on full blast, you just might hear something that you couldn't hear before. What it is will depend on what you're thinking. Consider this. If you are all alone in the dark, and you hear something, chances are that your mind will invent some of the most grotesque and horrible things that you can imagine. It's louder now. That noise, it's becoming more real with every passing second. With each heavy breath that your terrified body takes, you desperately try to calm yourself down, trying not to hear that noise as it gets closer and closer. It's not working. You're getting more and more scared by the second. Your mind is creating monsters at a mile a minute, each more terrifying than the last. How, you think? How can I be afraid of something if I don't even know what it is? You're practically panicking at this point. That noise is pounding in your ears like a drum, as you, in a desperate attempt of figuring out what that god-awful noise is, calm yourself by remembering an old quote that your grandmother used to tell you as a child. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. You repeat this over and over in your mind until finally everything goes quiet. The noise stops, and you stop, and that silence is back. What a strange quote, you think to yourself, as your ever-expanding mind begins to work again, the gears slowly turning in your head. Fear itself. What does that mean? As you think about this, a creature makes its presence finally known. A growl erupts from in front of you as a low, guttural laugh erupts from between its pearl-white teeth. A smile, much too big for its face, is plastered across its horrific mug. His eyes are colorless, except for the irises, which are bone white and glow, piercing through the night. A long, gangly arm grabs your hands, then your legs, and begins to pull. The figure in front of you begins to inch slowly towards you as you are gripped with pure terror. His putrid breath stings your face as you hear those words which were so comforting just minutes before, ooze out of the creature's mouth.
Don't worry, little one. Remember